Hello, world, and welcome back to another live stream of me creating this podcast monitoring tool. So, last time things got a little bit hectic as I kind of jumped around and was trying to design things on the fly. And so, I think part of the problem with that was that I didn't really sit there and create an overall kind of map of what this is going to look like. And so we ended up actually jumping into kind of some code in the middle and then needing kind of some other code around the sides. And so because we didn't really plan out the work, everything kind of got a little bit messy, as well as the kind of the recording itself got a little bit messy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually take a step back, and we're going to, since we branched off the code last time, we're going to go back to the main branch. We're going to make a couple updates to kind of make the work a little easier. I'm going to walk through this nice markdown extension that creates diagrams, and we'll kind of diagram out what we're doing, and then we'll go back into kind of coding some things. So let's get started, and first thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to tag all of the commits that we've ended on for the previous episodes. That way it's kind of easier to kind of see where everything's at. So first thing I'm going to do is open up the virtual environment again, and then we're going to check out the log here. So all the commits here are actually commits that we ended in the last episode because we haven't branched. And so we're going to tag some of these to kind of make it a little easier to kind of see what's going on. And so to do that, I'm basically going to go git tag. And then in this case, this last one was episode 4. So let me just see what kind of looks. I'm going to do EP4 like that with a capital E. And so if I do this, it should tag this most recent commit where I am on this branch. So now if I check out the log, you'll see that I got this tag right here. Now what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to switch over to this monitor, and I'm going to look up git tag because I believe I need to supply it with tag mention show lightweight. Try to see if I need to supply it with a specific argument to give it the commit. Another way to tag commits with the lightweight tag. All right, so those are mostly talking about the different types of tags and stuff. What I'm going to do, let's switch back. Remember this time, and let's check out git tag-h. See if there's any specific ones that reference like a commit. So contains commit. So this is -l, -a, key IDs, tag name, message. So I think I might just be able to do git tag, give it that tag name, and then give it the commit that I want. So in this case, what we're going to do is, so episode 1, we ended on filling in the RSS data. So that's this one here. So I'm going to type git tag, go ep1, and then use that commit. Now let's check out if that worked. Great. So we were able to easily tag this commit here. So the second episode ended on creating the web request, which is this 26B. And so I can go git tag ep2. And then in the third one we actually ended, we just did this one commit, which is also where main is. So that one's going to be get tag 3. So now if I look at the tags here, it kind of gives an easy way to see the progression through the episodes of where we kind of ended. So that's kind of a nice little marker there. So now, like I said, I'm going to go back to the main branch and kind of work off of there. So now if I go check out main, all right, so now I switch back to this main branch. And so if I look at this, so all this stuff kind of went away. This pi cache is still there because we added the get ignore to the other one. So we'll have to update that here. Let me actually check out real quick what that get ignore will look like. So I can easily just switch back to this RSSV tracer, same way by just get checkout. And then you'll see we're back here and the get ignore. So I just added it on the end there. And then so we'll go back. All right, so now let's check out the log again. And so you'll see that the tags are still there because I tagged the commits directly, but we don't have episode 4. So going on into the future, it'll be interesting because if we say we're working off of this branch here, and then we didn't have kind of the episode 4 code, it kind of creates this like tree and stuff. That'll be kind of interesting to maybe look at in a later episode. So one of the first things I actually want to do is I was thinking about this work tracker markdown, and I think it's actually a good idea to remove this from the get ignore. And my reason for that is because we have these kind of deliverables and tasks and stuff. If I start working on a different branch, and this is just kind of universal, I might get ahead, work on something, but then want to go back to the main branch, in which case this will be out of sync of where the main branch is. And then if I restart working on something else, somewhere else, and kind of do tasks a little differently, everything will kind of get hectic. So this actually I'm going to have as something that is tracking the specific work in the branch that it is on. And so because of that, I'm going to remove it from this get ignore file here. Now if I check out the status, I'll see that the work tracker has been added, and I still have this pi cache, and I've edited the get ignore. I'm going to add the pi cache in here. So again, I'm going to do star to do all pi cache files wherever they are. Do the cache and get rid of that. So now if I check out the status, pi cache is gone, ignore is updated, and the work down tracker is updated. So I'm going to git add, get all those back in, get all those in there for commit staged, and then I'm going to say removing work tracker from get ignore to be branch specific. So now one thing to obviously pay attention to here is, so episode 3 is here. If I look at the this commit here, I've now kind of gone forward off of main. So now if I'm coming back up and grabbing this here and I'm checking out this branch, so obviously I traded these commits back, but now let's look at the log here. So now as you'll see, main does not show up here. And so because main doesn't show up, I've now kind of diverted this in a way. Now there is an easy way to get back on. So if I wanted to keep working on this, but I could rebase off of main. And what it would do is it would find the most common ancestor, which is this episode 3. It would then go ahead, go back to this one, add in main's commits, and then replay these one by one in order on top. Actually, I'm going to do that now because it's not going to really require any effort because I updated this here, so I'll have to do maybe one merge conflict resolution, but maybe not because it might figure it out since that's already added in there. So let's do that. Let's do a git rebase on main. And so you'll see we did hit this kind of merge conflict here. Now you can basically edit these manually. The other nice thing is VS Code will kind of have these little changes. So you can see that the current change is here, So this is the separator. So you have the current change, and then you have the incoming change. So the incoming change is that work tracker's in here, and the current change, or the incoming change is from the RSS reader, right? So it's replaying these on. So that is that work tracker's in here, but in main, it's already been gone. So I actually want to accept the current change, which is that it was removed. And now if I check out the status, you'll see I'm in the middle of a rebase. So it's telling me that interactive rebase in progress. And then, it kind of has these things here. I can basically, I guess, resolve this like there. I can also do git rebase and kind of commit in stages. So I'm going to click this and see what happens. Okay, so I actually I don't need that. Continue. So let's check it out. Let's see where we are. All right. So that was all we needed to do. So now as you'll see, main is back. It has the commit that I just created on main and then replayed these on top. And so it was just that minor change because I had added PyCache here, and in the other one I added PyCache and removed the markdown that was in here. We just had to basically resolve those kind of minor conflicts. So now I'm going to go back to main. And again, so now we're back here, back on main, gotten rid of these commits. Okay, so the other thing that I kind of want to do is, so we didn't have any issue with the virtual environment in the last branch. But again, in a similar fashion to this work tracker here, if I were to say, create a branch and then start coding something, and I have to have an import, I would need to do a pip install, right? And then I would get a new set of requirements here, and I'd have to freeze them into the requirements file and change the file, right? So now, if I do a git branch and I branch back to the main branch, I now have things that are installed that aren't in the requirements file and that aren't necessary for what I'm currently working on. And so, similarly, while requirements is a checked-in file, when I do a git branch, I actually want to uninstall and reinstall the requirements. So to do that, it's actually kind of fairly simple. So if I do a pip, all right, so let's just real quick. So we'll do pip freeze, and that'll show in this virtual environment that I'm in, it shows all these things that are installed, which is the same as my requirements file. So let's say I want to do an uninstall, right? So I can go pip uninstall, and then I can give it the file, which is the argument for that is -r, so requirements. And then if I don't want to say yes to every time that, so what it's going to happen, it's going to uninstall these one by one, and then every time it's going to prompt me to type a Y and press enter, which if I'm going to script it, I don't end up wanting to do. So you can give it a -y. And so now it's going to uninstall all of these. And so as you see, it goes through and it uninstall successful, found the next one, uninstall successful, and finds each one, right? So now if I type pip freeze, you'll notice now nothing is installed. So this is similarly if you were to kind of clone this project, you'd want to install the requirements file. So I have this virtual environment, so I want to go pip install now, again -r, give it the requirements file, and press enter. So that now installs everything. If I check pip freeze, again, it once again matches the requirements file. Great. So every time I want to branch to like an older branch, so if I'm on a working branch, a feature branch that I'm doing something on, and I want to go back to main, then I want to basically uninstall the requirements file that is from that feature branch. I then want to branch back over to main and then reinstall the requirements that are active from main. They could be the same, but they could also be different. And if they are different, I do want them to change. If they're the same, then it doesn't really make too much of a difference. So instead of writing out these commands every time, I'm going to create a quick command script to do it for me. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it thebranch.cmd. So instead of typing git branch, and then a branch, I'm going to type vbranch, and then the branch name. So basically, all the main thing we need to do is first we want to uninstall, as I said. Then we're going to do the branch, and then we're going to do, which is actually not git branch, but it's git checkout as we were using. But I'm just going to kind of mark it. I'll just mark it with that instead, since git branch is an actual command. And then I'm going to reinstall the commits. Okay. So now there are two problems here. One is that I need to figure out how to do the branching, and then two, that this requirements file. So one of the issues with this is that Python is a language where if I were to if I'm running this from Podcast Monitor and I'm running just vbranch from here, it will be able to find the requirements file. However, if I'm running it from a different directory, so let's say I go into, I'm going to save this. Let's say I cd into the virtual one, right? And from here, for whatever reason, I'm somewhere in my project and I want to run this vbranch, right? So I would dot back into there and then type vbranch. Now, if I run this, what it's going to have a problem with is basically at this point everything. So do you see how the first, all the lines failed as expected? The first line, no such file or directory requirements. Why? Because it's actually looking for the requirements in this venv, because that's where I'm making the run from. But what I actually want is it to do it relative to this, where the vbranch is. The vbranch and the requirements are in the same directory, and so I want to use the directory that vbranch is in, not the directory that I'm running the script from. So, very simple way to do that in the command file. I can give it this, the %, and then it is the little squiggle, and then dp0. And then give it a \, and just to make things safe, I'm going to surround it in quotation marks. So, first thing we're going to do is I'm going to comment that out real quick. So that's rem is the comment. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to echo what I just typed in here to kind of give a demonstration. So if I say that, so now if I run vbranch, what you'll see is that in this first line, so I ran vbranch and then it echoed, and what it's echoing is actually this dp0. And as you can see, when it echoes it as the location of vbranch, not the location where I am at in venv. And so if I come back and I go back into the podcast thing and I then just type vbranch, okay, so it did the install because I was able to find it, but that doesn't really matter. When we echo, we still are echoing this podcast. So the fact is, wherever we call this script from, this dp0 here is going to kind of root it in this directory, so I'll know where everything is essentially. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to copy this here and replace this requirements with it. So now the last thing we need to do is we need to do the actual branching. We need to actually check out the branch that we want. So the command for that is git checkout. And then, so if I were to branch, I would type like, git checkout other branch, right? And when I do this, in this case, there is no other branch. So if I want to do this, I could do like a -b and then create a new branch. But in this case, right, the other branch doesn't exist, but I have to give it the branch like this. So I have to kind of give it the arguments. But what if I do want to give it other arguments in front of it? Maybe a -b shouldn't be necessary, but what you can do in the command script is I can give it the same % and then a star. And so any arguments that I type in here will be given to it. So as an example, let me just real quick remove these. And so let's just do %star. Right? So all this is going to do is echo those back out. So now if I do vBranch, right, nothing comes out. It just has these lines in here. Now if I do vBranch other branch, you'll see that it tries to run them. So let me just do echo to make it very clear what I'm doing here. So see, basically it does these and then echoes out other branch. Now let's say I give it another arg. So let's say I'm doing like that, right? You see how it like pairs up all these args. So this is basically the substitution. So if I'm running vBranch, which in a way I could also call it like vCheckout or something. But so if I run vBranch here, what I want it to do is basically pass along all these args to the checkout. And that'll be accomplished by this. So now we have that script created. So if we check it, so let's just make sure we didn't mess up anything. Oh, tip freeze. All right. So all that's still good. So let's check out what we have here. So we just have this new file. So we're going to add it in, and then git commit, and say created vBranch. All right. So now the next thing we're going to work on is the actual kind of diagramming, so I can kind of lay out what we kind of have here. So last time I kind of jumped right into things and started coding, and then what ended up happening was I jumped into what actually turned out to be the middle, and then had to create the different classes. And so as I was kind of thinking about it, the better way to kind of think about it is to actually start at the kind of the data, where the data is, and think about the classes that it essentially needs to go to transform into the data that we want. And so as I was kind of thinking about it, I was trying to come up with a good way to kind of discuss and diagram it. And in this case, there's actually a really cool markdown tool called Mermaid. So I'm going to create another section of the notes for diagram. And the way that you would write Mermaid is like a code block. So you type these triple quotes, say that it's mermaid, or the backticks, and then another triple backtick. Now, Mermaid is not immediately installed with Markdown. So if I actually look at this here, there's just kind of this empty code block. And if I start to kind of write stuff, it's actually not going to do anything. So let's say I would just create something real quick. And try to write that, right? It's just going to come out as this because Mermaid isn't installed. So there's a very simple way to install it. So you can there's two ways to install it. There's an extension that's available for it. So I can come over to extensions and I can search for Mermaid, and you'll see that these ones come up. So this first one has 500,000 downloads. Markdown preview Mermaid support by Matt Bierner, and it's verified. And then there's a few other ones with a bunch of others that might do some interesting things. So this is the first one that we're actually interested in. So you can come in here and you can simply install this here. The other thing that you can do to install it is you can install it directly from the command line. And so the way to install an extension is you're going to type code install -extension, and the name of this one, I have it saved over here, is the name of the person that created it, and then markdown -mermaid. So if I run this, you'll see that it installs the extension, and and everything was installed successfully. Now, as you can tell, it still doesn't work, and the reason is we have to restart Visual Studio's code. But right before we do that, I'm going to copy over a link to the doc. And this, so here now I have this, oh, actually it did work right away. So I don't need to restart. It's great. So as you can see, now it went from simply putting out this to actually taking this D1 to D2 and then kind of coming over here and doing this. I'm going to copy this link and I'm going to real quick switch over to the other monitor. And we're going to come to this documentation. So this has actually, it's a really cool little feature here with this documentation. And so as you can kind of see, you can create all these different types of flowcharts, sequence diagrams, class diagrams, state diagrams, all in Markdown. And so you define stuff in Markdown like this, where you like here we're creating a graph, A to B. So A points to B, A points to C, B points to D, and C points to D. And then it can kind of create this nice little diagram. There's also this, you can also create sequence diagrams, you can create Gantt charts, class diagrams, right? So it's actually kind of, you can create a whole Git graph. And so it's kind of cool that you can kind of like just define everything in Markdown in plain text and then have it be able to easily be generated into this kind of visual thing. So not only do you have a simple portable definition of your structure as opposed to creating like an image or something, it's you have it in plain text, but you can also import it to anywhere that supports Mermaid. And in this case, you know, with the Visual Studio extension. So we're just going to start with a simple flowchart. And as you can see, just by kind of looking at it, the different things that are available for it. So for the flowchart, you can kind of create these different boxes. You can link them to each other. You can have different shapes of nodes for different things. You can have your databases. You can have various nodes and rhombuses, hexagons, parallelograms, trapezoids. You can also have different types of links. You can have arrows and open links, invisible links. You can put text on the links. You can put dotted links. You can write them in various ways to chain things together. So there's all this nice, cool stuff that we can kind of do with that. Oh, and you can even kind of make subgraphs, which will kind of box things up and to organize things kind of nicely. Right, so you can, you know. So all this kind of nice little things you can do. So let's switch back over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this down a little bit and I'm going to split these. So one kind of nice thing is it'll actually update live. So if I do like D2 and then point it to S1, right, kind of points to it. If I want to go left, right, I can do that and have them go across. And so it will update kind of live as you're doing it. So it's a really cool little tool to use. In our case, so we're going to we're going to start creating a little diagram for kind of what we want, right? And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some classes, right, for the data that I want. So in this case, let's just call it D1. And one thing you can do is you can kind of give, so as opposed to, that can be like an ID essentially, you can give it a name. So if I put this here in this little box, I can say metadata, right? So the first thing I'm starting with is the metadata, which is in the JSON file, right? So if you think about it, the the input of the system is this metadata file, this feeds, which has the JSON. What I want to do is I want to use that to get the XML data from the RSS feed, and then I want to pull that in, I want to process that, and then I want to use that to do some logic on it, right? So the first data source that I'm going to be using is the metadata. Now, if I put it here in these little boxes, it creates this in a box. Let's say I put it into these parentheses, I get a little rounded off box, and if I put it, I can put it in a circle. I can also put it into, depending on the order of these, I can put it into a what is essentially a database in this little cylinder, or I can put it in here. And this is what I'm going to do for this. So the data I'm going to put into these kind of ovals here to differentiate different things. So the other data I have, as I said, was D2, and that's going to be the RSS, and that's in XML. So these are kind of just like the little data types that I have here. So then the next thing I need to do is I need to kind of create, as we kind of did last time, I need to create kind of these structs to hold it, right? So I can read in JSON, I can read in XML, and I could just pass it around in a dictionary. In the case of the metadata, I could just pass it around the dictionary since that's data I provide. I could also wrap it in a very thin API. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to still throw it into a basic struct, in really a class that I'm going to consider as kind of like a virtual dictionary. So when I actually get into the coding, what you're going to see is I'm essentially going to wrap a dictionary in a class, but then give that class the ability to access the dictionary through directly from the class. So it'll essentially be it'll be a class, but it'll be acting like a dictionary, but it'll be self-validating, which will be a nice little kind of feature to have on. And I'm going to use those for both of these. So I'm going to call those S1 and S2. And these I'm going to put into another shape that is the curly braces, double curly braces. And for this one, we have metadata, and we're going to call that a validated dictionary. So don't get it confused with the V branch, where the V here is for virtual. This V is for validated, and they are completely unrelated. So these little double ones here, so if I put it in singles, it puts it into this rhombus, I think it is. In this case, it kind of puts it into this kind of cool little shape. And so I'm going to use this as kind of these like struct classes. So I'm going to add another one, and this is going to be the RSS. Now, I don't need to save the entire RSS feed, right? I'm going to take the RSS feed and I'm going to parse it. I'm going to parse it, and the main thing I'm grabbing is essentially the episodes, right? So when I actually go and grab it, there's all this other kind of data. So if we look at the prototype real quick, when we grab it, I can get the channel title, but I kind of already know that. But then I can get the channel items, and the items are these episodes. So really, I want some sort of structure that's going to store this episode information, the title, the description, the publishing date, this is the duration, and then the URL to the actual MP3. So here, I'm actually going to call it episode, and this is also going to be a validated dictionary. And then the third one that I'm going to have is going to be, so I'm going to, right, so that's enough. So if I'm doing one feed, right, I have the metadata for the feed, which is a JSON dictionary. I have the RSS feed itself in XML, and then I have these that essentially are storing these two elements here. But once I start getting into having multiple feeds, right? So once I have like the main feed and the different sub feeds, I'm going to want to be able to, if this episode is just like one episode, so it's one episode with a title and a description and a length and then a link to an MP3, right? Well, then the list of episodes for the feed it's going to be a list of these validated dictionaries, right? So then I can pass around that list, but I have, I want to associate it with a name or associate it with the metadata. So I'm going to want to have a third struct or class, you could argue, and this one is going to be holding the feed itself, and basically this feed is going to be a composite of these other two dictionary types. It's going to hold a list of these and this. Now that's more meant for like a class diagram. Right now we're doing a flow chart, so I'm not necessarily like linking all those up in a normal way, but that way we have that. So now, well, what are we doing with this, right? So the first thing we need to do is we need to convert the data, right? So the D1 is going to turn into S1. And I can do that with either 2, and as I add more, it kind of makes these a little longer things. So I'm converting D1 into S1, and I can give it a little thing here, which I'll put on this line convert, right? So metadata, the metadata JSON is converted into this virtual dictionary. Similarly, I'm going to take D2 and convert it into S2. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's not going to be as straightforward, because while I control the JSON, I don't control the XML. So I don't want to have this be as simple. I'm actually going to want to parse it. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to take the XML, the raw XML, and parse it into episodes. And it's actually going to be like a list of episodes, right? Now, the other thing I need to think about to actually do this parsing is I'm going to need some various classes to do the actual work, right? So I'm going to need a class to do the actual parsing, so we'll call it the parser. I'm going to need a class that will, in the end, filter down the, that's going to filter whatever episodes that I get down into the episodes I want. So let's say I want all episodes for today. I'm going to need something that basically looks at the episodes here and then can filter them down. I'm going to use a slightly different symbol for these. So if I add these little lines here, this gives me this little filter. So as you can kind of like the point of this is episodes come in and then less episodes come out. And then another class I'm going to need is the class that is going to make the web request to get the XML. So given the JSON, it's going to actually get the XML, right? So you could think about it where, so I have S1, and that's going to go into C3, and then C3 is going to make a call into is going to call the D2. And then that D2 is going to go to the parser, that's C1. And then C1 is going to parse it into S2, which is this one up here. I'm going to remove this left, right, and have it be vertical so it's larger. So, right, so I have the metadata. I am converting it into this validated dictionary. Going to make going to send that to the requester, which is going to send it to is going to make a request to the RSS, and then that's going to pass the data to the parser. I can remove this link here. and the parser is going to parse it into this episode dictionary, right? Which is when we're going to combine the feeds and do all this. Now, this isn't specifically kind of how these links work, right? The requester is going to get this back and it's going to pass back to the parser. So realistically, the requester and the parser are actually kind of part of this same subgraph. So I'm going to create a subgraph and call it feed parser. And then down here, I'm going to say end. And so, actually, I want to move this down a line. And move this down a line. And actually, I'm going to move this down a line too, because this is going to be the output. I'm going to output this. So I'm going to create another O and just call it output. And so S2 goes to O. And add some spaces here to just indent these things. And there we go. All right, so now I have this feed parser going to the requester. So one interesting thing is that so this is actually going to S1. S1 is then going here as input into C3. Now, here's kind of the deal with this, right? I would say the requester is going to be, as we kind of talked about, it's not going to be like this full module. It's going to be kind of this little piece of code. So it's not actually going to take the input. Now maybe I would have like a delegator class, but the parser is probably going to be fairly simple. So the parser itself might actually take the metadata and then say, okay, I need this metadata. So it's going to talk to the requester to grab the RSS, and then it's going to get it back. So there's actually kind of a loop here. So this input is actually going to go, instead of from C3, the requester, it's going to go to the parser, right? Now, the parser is then going to communicate with the requester here. And so the parser itself okay, so let's remove that here. Okay, so okay, the requester is going to make a request from the RSX, the RSS feed, and then D2 is going to return a result to C3, right? So we have this kind of loop here. So the parser is actually going to communicate with the requester, and I can do this in any order, right? Because we're all just kind of in this subgraph. So I could put it above or I could put it below. But basically, the parser C1 is going to have a back and forth with the requester C3 here. To actually kind of make this, I want to see if I put this inside. Okay, no. Okay. So the parser is going to communicate with the requester. It's going to make a request. It's going to then return the result and give it back to the parser. The parser is then going to I'm going to call this convert instead of parse. It's going to convert the information it gets back into these episodes, and then it's actually going to and I mean it's going to get those back, and it's actually going to then C1 C S2. Or is it S2? S3. Okay. And then here it's going to package them into this. And then the output here of the system. So the metadata is kind of the input. But we actually, before we kind of output, we also have a filter. So S2 is going to go to the filter, which is C2. And then C2 is going to come to and be the actual output here. Let me see, what else can I put output in? What if I do this? Yeah, that looks fine. And then so filter, I'm gonna say, so we have this input output here. I wish I could like move that around or something, but and then a filter output. That's probably pretty good. So okay, so as a kind of basics of what we were just doing there, right? So we just did a whole bunch of diagramming in Mermaid, and we were just kind of messing around with what we have. But as you can tell from like the Mermaid side, very simple to do. You can create a flow chart. You can also do like something like this if I wanted to throw it in here. I kind of like this better as long as I have like the real estate for it. But then we have these two data classes, right? And so you can just kind of define various sort of kind of boxes with this, and I can give it different symbols, which kind of give it different meaning, very popped out meaning. I can then create links between them very easily. I can, using just kind of these things, I can then kind of create these sort of links here. And then I can also create this little subgraph to kind of box things up. The other thing I actually want to do is I do want to create a link here because, well, what is feed, right? And so I'm going to create a dotted line, which is I think this, into S3, and then I'm going to do S2. So as you can kind of see here, right, I kind of use these dotted lines to indicate, well, these are parts of this. I also want to add this here and say request. And I'm going to label these by numbers. All right. So what do we have? So this is the final diagram that we created, and it looks fairly complicated with all the arrows and stuff, so there might be a simple way to do this. But if you look at it, basically, we start with the metadata. We start with our JSON file. We're going to convert it into this virtual dictionary, and then that's going to be an input to this parser. The first thing this parser is going to do is it's going to make a request. So it uses the requester, comes over here, makes a request to the source feed, gets the result, and that's going to come and then back to the parser. The parser is then going to convert it into these episodes, this other validated dictionary here, and then it's going to package it into a feed. The feed is a combination, as we were talking about earlier, with the metadata as well as a list of these episodes. It then is going to output to the filter, which is going to really kind of be outside the feed parser. And then that's going to, so the filter is going to take these feeds and it's going to filter the episodes down, and that'll be the final output depending on the logic we put in here. So this is all kind of like simple, and then we'll change the filters that the feed parser uses, and we can give it different input based off of different metadata, which is basically different feeds that it's using. And then this whole little box here is going to kind of consolidate that. So now that we've spent a bunch of time doing that, let's come up here and go status, git commit created mermaid diagram of system. Okay, so now I'm going to move this back over here. Is this saved? That was not. What's the diff here? Oh, okay, so when I added the output, I didn't resave it. So what I'm going to actually do, so I'm going to do git log one line -5. I'm going to git reset head back 1, and I'm going to remove this commit that I just added on. So now if I check it out, right, I'm back on this virtual branch here now. And now all of the changes to the diagram are back here, but it's also saved, so now I can just recommit it with that same commit that I was using, and we'll get it back on top. And as you'll notice, just it's a different commit because it's hashed differently. So while this B36 is still here, B36, we have a 273, and here we have an 092. Okay, so now we're actually back and ready to get coding again. So we did some coding, and then we did too much coding too quickly, so we jumped back and did other things. That's interesting. I wonder why this is showing. I'm going to close this out and do a new preview. I don't know why it was showing that other one. All right, there we go. So, so we're doing create tracer for RSS feed reader class using TDD. So this whole thing you could say is the feed reader class, right? So this is the whole thing is kind of this feed reader. So there are kind of some tasks that we want to do. So we want to create the feed parser. Before that, we want to create we want to make sure we have the input. So I think the first thing we should do is create the data classes, or at least specifically create the metadata vdict and the episode dict. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change here. I'm going to cut this one. And I'm going to create a new 7. And so they're going to be like, so this was created first. So this is 6 because I don't want to like redo all the numbers. But this is going to come before necessarily prototyping this. I could obviously add different ways to do order, or I could create another level of things above this. But I'm not too concerned with that now. So the main things we wanted to do was we want to create okay, we're going to say 7 open, and then 8, and then 9. So we're going to create 3 new ones. So this first one is going to be create data classes. This next one, so that's going to be creating, so we already have the metadata and this RSS feed exists. So we're going to create these little hexagonal type boxes for the metadata. I'm going to actually move this back over now so I can look at the diagram as I do it. Maybe I can't really do that because it wants to scroll simultaneously. Anyway, so we have this. So we want to create the metadata, create the episode, and create the feed. So let's add tasks for that. So this is going to be, we're on 10. And this is based off of 7. Create validated dictionary class for metadata. And we need 3 more of those, so we're going to have 11, 12, validation dictionary class for episodes, and create bundle class for feed. The next thing, then we have this next one. So create the data classes. After we create the data classes, we want to create these different element. So we basically want to create the feed parser. Create feed parser. And for that, so this is going to be 13 based off of 8. And so for this one, we need to create the parser, the requester, but we also need to essentially create these different kind of things. So we need to be able to functionality to make requests. So let's do it from the functionality perspective. We want to make a request, we want to convert it, we want to package it. So we only need 3 of these, and this one's going to be 14, this one's going to be 15. All right, so we're going to make RSS request, parse RSS response, and package package feeds episodes. And the last one we have here is to create the filter. And we're not going to text that out. Create episode filter. All right, so let's commit this as well. Added deliverables and tasks for feed reading, we'll say. All right, we're at about an hour now, but I do want to do some coding quick, and since it's a holiday today, let's do it. So let's commit this, and now move this back over. All right, great. So it seems when we move it over, it doesn't like to do that. So, all right. So now we have these 4 open deliverables, prototyping the Twitter API, which we're not going to do yet, create the data classes, create the feed, episode filter. And so we're going to start with creating the data classes, and the tasks for that is create the validated dictionary class for the metadata. And so we're going to create a branch for this one as well. And the question essentially becomes, do we want to branch off for the deliverable or branch off for the tasks? I'm going to branch off for the deliverable as it's kind of like one thing that we want to deliver. So let's say, let's verify everything is good to go. Okay, so let's go git checkout. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use the vbranch command. So even though we have the same requirements, vbranch should now work, so it'll be a good test for us. So let's do vbranch. And so this is the equivalent of doing a git checkout. So we want to do -b because we want to create a new branch. And then what are we going to call the branch? So let's call it data classes, and then let's give it the deliverable number so it's kind of obvious like what this is like corresponding to. So 007. And so it goes through the uninstall, it goes through, so if we look at it real quick. So where did we do this? We were... That's weird. I'm not showing all that stuff, but it did the everything's kind of all like jumbled up, I think, because it was kind of different. But if we just check it real quick, all right. So where head is now pointing to this data class is 007. We have main open here where we added the deliverables. So we have all these past commits that we created, and then if we check hit freeze. You see that everything is still installed because there is no difference. So let's come over here. I'm going to pin this back again. I had to just remember that. I guess whenever I move it over, it causes an issue. All right, so let's started. Or no, in progress is what we were saying. So that's in progress, and this will be in progress. All right, so we need to create, as we kind of did last time. So actually, I guess what we'll do is we're going to create a whole bunch of commits here, and then when we actually move it back, we're going to slim them down. So I'm going to commit this. Marked work started in work tracker. Okay, so now I need to create 2 new files. So we're going to create this. So we're creating this validated dictionary for metadata. Let's create a new feed metadata.py, and we'll create a new feed metadata unit test.py. All right, and so kind of as we kind of did last time, we did do some of the things that were necessary. So we're going to import unit tests. We're going to create a feed metadata test, and that's off of unit test.suite test case. And we have to call it a class. And then we have the 2 methods, the setup. And was it teardown? Create this here. And then test hello. And then at the end here, we're going to do if name equals main. And this is, what is it, unit test.main. Okay, so that's basically what we need for this. What am I doing? So let's just run that. And you see is we ran it. Hello world, 1 test passed. Great. So now we need to, from feed metadata, import feed metadata. And now, actually, before we do that, let's commit this. And UT. All right, great. So now we'll come back, we'll add it back in, and now this will fail. All right. So the whole point of test-driven development is you do something, it fails, and then you do something, it fails, right? So cannot import feed metadata from feed metadata. So the question just becomes, as you do something, you're like, I need this to happen. Okay, so I need to be able to import I need to import feed metadata. So I try to do it. Okay, so what do I have to code to get that to work? Well, I just need to create a feed metadata class. And now if I run it, boom, it passes. So what is contained within the feed metadata? So the feed metadata is the name, the URL, and the type. So we'll start with and so this is, so what are we testing here, right? We're creating something that is essentially, right? Going to wrap the JSON. It's going to use a dictionary, and it's going to kind of wrap it. So what do we need to kind of test? We need to basically be able to test that we can create a test that we are going to be able to basically create one of these, right? So we want to say feed metadata, and let's just start with one variable. So we're going to give it podcast name. And we're going to pass things in as a dictionary. So we want to, so it needs to be able to take a dictionary with, let me check out the feed real quick. So name URL type. So we'll just use these. So we want name. So it needs to be able to take in this here, right? And so if we run it, can't do it because it takes no arguments. So we need to add a constructor, and it needs to be able to take a dictionary data. So now if we run it, great, test passes. Okay, so we can take in this dictionary. So now we should be able to get the value back, right? So let's at least for now just say that we're saving it as, so right, like let's say, so we're going to say that, what do we call it? What can we call this? I guess we can just call it metadata. So metadata dot data name, and we're going to say self dot assert equal this podcast name, right? So we should, the metadata should have this name here, right? And so the first thing we see is that, okay, has no attribute ddata, right? And so I'm just going to do this like super step by step. So, okay, so self.ddata equals empty dictionary. All right, great. So now, no key. There's no key name. So the easiest way to do this is we're just going to do with a copy. And so now we do have that. And if we check, and so we can get it like this. But one thing that we want to be able to do is we don't want to have to access it through this D data. It would be great if we didn't have to do that. We would really want to be able to access it directly like this, because essentially we're just wrapping this, right? So in here, if we had, right, if we said, metadata, and we did name, podcast name, right, and then we fill this in here, right? So if this was, instead of that, if this was this, right, this is still going to pass because it's just checking this here. So now what we, and then one thing with the copy, well, okay, so we're not using that yet. But so now if we do this though, we still want to be able to do this because all this is going to do is validate what we have going on. So we really, see, it says it's not subscribable. We can't do this. And it's super easy to actually make it subscribable. We just need to create another method, and we need to override the getItem method. And then if we give it self, and then the item that we want, we can return self.ddata item, right? So all we're doing is we're getting the the dictionary we created and returning item from it. And what getItem does is getItem allows this sort of subscribability here. So now, if we run this, it passes. So now we can just access things Now, if they don't have it, it's still going to be the same error as if it was a normal dictionary, right? So if I want to get a type, well, there is no type, but it's a key error, and that's actually kind of what we want. So let's do this. Now, one interesting thing is, let's say we didn't do this copy. So we remove this copy here, right? So this is still going to work. But now, what happens if I change this dictionary? So the dictionary is in a sense, it's passed by, it's a reference. It's passed where, as opposed to creating a new dictionary and passing it in, this specific one is passed in. And so if I edit this one and go demetadata, name equals new podcast name, and now I run this, test fails, right? Because this is giving me new podcast name, and that is not equal to podcast name. So how do I get this to pass? Well, I go back to the copy. So now when it gets passed in, I create a copy of this. So now if I edit this one directly, it's not going to affect this anymore. All right. And so great. Now I have this thing where I can pass it in and I can copy it and I can create this thing. So I'm going to end up wanting to fill in the other attributes. But the other thing I want is, this is a validated, right? The whole point of this is that I am validating something. And so I don't want to be able to save a value of the wrong type. I want it to basically throw an error. So let's say test create with test int as name. Just make it something similar like that. So now let's say I create this metadata, or I want to create a metadata with a fee metadata. I want to pass it this dictionary where name, but now name is an integer, right? And I don't want that because, I mean, I mainly don't want some of the other things, but, right, the name should be a string like this, right? So if I do this, we have no issue. But I want this to be an error. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method called validate. And this method I'm going to call from here. So after I create a copy of the data, I'm going to call validate. And you can call validate at any time. So at any point, I can validate this metadata. So what do I need to do to validate? Well, it needs to have a name, right? So the one option is that we can use this testing. In a normal class, we could use this testing to say, okay, this class needs to have a name element. That name element needs to be a string. So I could say, you know, test that it has a name, test has a string. But I want the data, in this case, as opposed to a class, I want this data to be validated, that if I'm using it, if I create it, it's going to be created correctly. If someone goes and messes with this and then changes this to, comes and goes metadata name equal to 1, maybe it doesn't fail because I'm allowing direct access to it, but I can then just call validate and validate that everything is correct, right? So what I'm going to do here is I want to validate that it has a name and that name is a string. Now, I guess in this case, I really want to validate that the URL is a string. I guess the name could be anything, but at least for now, we're going to do it this way. So the first thing, right? So essentially, I can kind of write this code where I can say sname equals. Now I can do self.ddata.name, but since I already have this get item, I can access it directly like this. So I can just say name. So this will error if there's the key error. And then I can say if type sname not equal to a string, I want to, so I can do two things. I can assert, or I can raise a type error. I'm going to raise the type error because then I can actually capture the type error in the test. If I did the assert, I would essentially have to capture the assert and then like re-raise it, which I don't know, feels a little too much of like kind of like passing it through, when in reality, yes, I'm raising a type error. So if I create this, and you create it with the name of something else, it's gonna be a type error. And then I'm just going to give it the type of sname. And maybe I can clean up. So let's run the test now. And I think the one should now fail based off what we have. Yeah, so type error class int. So let's say name is %s. Should be what is type? Let me see something real quick. What if I do type? Okay, I'm actually going to do it like that. I'm going to use single quotes here because I prefer single quotes. Should be %s. And then I can do % to add those in, comma, type, str. So now let's exit this and rerun this. So now see I get a better type error. Name is class int, should be class. Oh, it's class type. Okay. Class str. All right, now let's run it. Verify that's nice. All right, so see now, if when I'm running this and I pass it a 1, it goes, the name is, okay, you know what, I am going to do it like this. I can do name is, should be, and then I'm just going to do this directly in here. Remove that, add that. Leave the %, remove this, get rid of that jump. All right. So now, yeah, name is class int, should be class string, right? And so it points to, see, it goes, okay, in unit tests, line 17, called this, is called the initialization function, which calls validate, and validate, we get this error where name is an integer instead of a string. So now we can say try. So now in the test itself, we can try this and go. So we're going to go try. We're going to say, what can we call this? So we'll say exception thrown equals false. I'll put this outside actually. And the reason I'm putting it outside is because I'm only going to catch. So if another exception is thrown, I only want to actually catch this type error here. So in this case, if I get a different error, then this one actually, when we're not getting a type error, then I don't want it to necessarily catch here. So then I can say exception thrown true. And then I want to assert true. All right. So I'm literally testing if feed metadata is created with a 1, then I'm going to get a type error because it should be a string, right? So kind of like in this case where I created it. I did the same thing, but I created it with this. So now if I run this, this should pass. Okay, so now that's actually, there's another error, right, that kind of comes in here that that should exist, and that's that the name needs to be there, right? So if I were to test no name, so if I were to create a metadata, feed metadata with an empty dictionary, right? This will throw an error. So I'm not doing the true like test-driven development portion here, but you see now we have this key error, right? So I could copy this down, and just to kind of demonstrate what I was talking about, where okay, so I'm going to take this, remove that, put it in here. So now I am catching exception, but I'm catching a type error and not a key error. So I still get this issue where key error name. And so in this case, I'm going to change this to key error. Right. So in theory, I'll do that in a second. So now get it, and now it passes. So in theory, what I should have done was remove these 2 lines of code. And I should have created these tests. So this is the test-driven development way that I should have done it, where I should create this test if, I'm going to call this name not string. So now if I run this, I'm going to get 2 failures. Oh, indentation block in... Oh. Because I commented out all the code for it. So it's empty. So, all right. So I get 2 failures. It's expecting false. False is not true, right? And so they're failing here where exception thrown. So let's start with the. I'm going to reorder these because technically this one makes more sense to come first because I'm carrying that it has a name. So now. Test no name, right? Exception not thrown, right? False. Assert true that exception is thrown. Exception thrown is false, right? So there's no exception here. So we want there to be an exception if no name is passed. In which case, to get that test to pass, we come in here and we do this. Now we could throw like similar to here. We could raise an exception if we could do something like. If name not in self or self.data, whatever we want to do here, right? Raise an exception. But there's already a built-in exception for this. If name doesn't exist, this will fail. And we need to do this for the next test anyway. So if we add in this, and we run, see the test passes. Now we only have 1 failure. The failure is test name not string. So in this case, right, we're having this. We expect an exception to be thrown. And the exception should give a type error when something like this is given, where we have a name given, but it's a 1. And that's where we add this back in. And so if the type of string is the type of the name is not a string, then throw that type error, right? And that's like the real way to do test-driven development, because typically it's easier to do test-driven development when you already kind of have something in place, right? So now that I kind of have something in place, the next thing I would want to do, and then we'll stop right after this, is we want to say test. Well, in this case, I'm going to update this to okay, so what's interesting here, right, is if I add another test for one of the other variables that doesn't exist, well, then this test will fail because I have to actually kind of update this one to get to pass, which I can do actually. So I could say, let's say the next thing I want to do is the URL. So I could say URL https yeah, so give a URL here, right? And this is still going to pass. And so let me add it to this one down here. That still passes, and now I want to come in and say, well, if it doesn't have that, test no URL, right? And then I'm going to, it's the same concept as that, so I'm going to use the same code. I'm going to change this to a name. I'm going to create the podcast name, right? Now no exceptions thrown, so that test is going to fail. So now I need to have a way for this test to be true. So I'll come in here and say SURL equals self URL. Now, in general, it's probably like, because this class is small, it might not be great because this is kind of look kind of confusing, but because the class is so small, it, you know, if you're looking at this, the get item basically is telling you this directly. So hopefully that's clear enough. So I got the key. Oh, I got the key error from a different test. So this test now passes the test URL. The test that failing is this test create. And what I'm going to do is I'll just add this in, because I don't. So depending on how exactly I'm going to format the testing, I don't necessarily need this one. Now I might use this one to say, like, you know, test not editable, right? Or you know, do I want to test if it is subscribable or stuff like that? But at least for now we have that. So if we check out what we have here, right, we have all these kind of new tests and stuff. We'll just commit this en masse. Added UTs and functionality for name. Added UTs and functionality for name and partially URL validations. I feel like that's a little wordy and weird. All right, so let's look at what we got here. So before we do that, let's open this up. All right, so where we're at. So we've created, so after doing all that stuff that we kind of went through with the diagrams, creating all these other scripts, branching, doing a whole bunch of fun stuff, in my opinion, we started creating the data classes. We're now on this data class branch for this one, and we have started the validation dictionary. So next time we're going to end up coming in and we're going to finish up the class that we're working on here, and we'll start working on some of these other kind of data classes that we have. So we'll fill out this validation function, we'll do some classes, and then we'll add in kind of the other ones. And maybe we'll try to do more test-driven development in that sense, since it's a little kind of more, since we'll already kind of have a template almost in place. So let's do this real quick. And so let's add, so now we're going to make sure that we add the tags in as we go. So this is episode 5. So as I kind of mentioned, we're going to kind of lose episode 4. It's going to be like, well, what happened? And then, you know, you'll have to like do some commit stuff to kind of see how that like branched out. So we'll do git tag ep5. And now if we check it out, we have episode 5 tagged in here. So yeah, got a lot done. Super long episode today, but like I said, it's a holiday. We were able to kind of hopefully branch back, clean up the stuff that we're kind of doing, you know, make it clear, right? We were hopefully able to kind of use, you know, this confusing diagram to alleviate some of the kind of confusion from last time, and added some kind of things in the kind of the working space, the V branch with the work tracker, this mermaid, to kind of be helpful there. and we're able to kind of get in hopefully some good coding, some kind of more interesting things than we did last time, which are a little kind of haphazard. So next time we will continue going down this diagram. So hopefully that was interesting. So with that, till next time, see you.